A blind date with fate. Aiden Mercer gripped the steering wheel of his sleek black SUV, staring at the warm glow of the restaurant ahead. The lights spilling from its windows gave it an inviting atmosphere, but that didn't change the fact that he had no interest in being here. His sister Ivy, standing outside his car with her arms folded, was giving him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Aiden, I swear, if you don't get out of this car, I will personally drag you in there myself." Aiden exhaled through his nose, tilting his head back against the seat. "Why do you do this to me?" he muttered. "Blind dates. What are we, 16? No, you're 35, single, and wasting your life behind a screen." Ivy shot back, her voice full of determination. "This is me being helpful." "I don't need help," he grumbled. "Yeah, you do," she insisted. "Look, I know you, Aiden. You bury yourself in work, avoid anything emotional, and push people away. But that's not a life. That's just existing." Aiden clenched his jaw. He hated how well she knew him. "She's a nurse," Ivy continued, softening slightly. "Her name is Olivia. Just go inside, talk to her, and if you hate her, you can tell me I'm a terrible matchmaker. But you won't. Trust me." Aiden glanced at the restaurant again. The soft chatter of couples and friends inside. The smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the door. It all felt strangely comforting. More than he wanted to admit. With a frustrated sigh, he grabbed his keys. "Fine. But this is the last time." "Sure it is," Ivy said, smirking as she stepped back. "Now go charm her with that broody billionaire thing you've got going." Aiden ignored her and headed inside, rehearsing polite phrases in his head. "Hi. Nice to meet you. That was a good start. Sorry, I'm not interested." That would probably follow. The host guided him toward a corner table where a woman sat with perfect posture, her hands clasped lightly on the table. As Aiden approached, she looked up, and for a second, his steps faltered. She was beautiful, not in an untouchable magazine cover way, but in a way that felt warm, inviting. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, intelligent and kind. Her dark auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and she had the kind of gentle confidence that made her seem like she belonged to another world entirely. She smiled. "Hi," she said, standing and offering her hand. "I'm Olivia." Aiden took her hand, surprised by how warm and steady it was. "Aiden." She sat back down, and he followed suit, suddenly feeling unprepared for this. "So Ivy tells me you're a tech genius," Olivia said, her voice light but curious. Aiden let out a small chuckle. "Genius might be pushing it. I run a software company. It's not as exciting as it sounds." "Well, you've already beaten me," she said playfully. "I'm just a nurse." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure that's more impressive than sitting in an office all day." She smiled, but something flickered in her expression. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Aiden caught it. "Curious. So, how did Ivy rope you into this?" he asked, trying to find the rhythm of the conversation. Olivia laughed, a soft and genuine sound. "One of my patients is a friend of hers. They mentioned you, said you were nice but tragically unavailable. So, I figured why not." Aiden smirked. "Tragically unavailable. That's one way to describe it." "And is it true?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "The unavailable part, I mean." He hesitated. "I've been busy, I guess. Work keeps me distracted." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Everyone's running from something." The words hit harder than Aiden expected. He cleared his throat. "And what about you? What's your excuse?" "Excuse?" "For being single." Olivia leaned back slightly. "I just don't meet a lot of people outside of work. Hospitals don't exactly make for great social settings." Aiden chuckled. "I can imagine," but something in her voice made his mind churn. The way she spoke, her voice, her presence, it was like a puzzle snapping into place. And then it hit him. His breath caught. "You were there," he said suddenly, his voice quieter but urgent. Olivia's smile froze. "What?" Aiden leaned forward, searching her face. "3 years ago, after my accident, you were my nurse." Her fingers tightened slightly around her glass, her expression unreadable. She started, but then she straightened her shoulders, forcing a calm expression. "I think you're mistaken." "I'm not," Aiden said, his heart pounding now. "I remember you." Olivia shook her head, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't recall ever meeting you before tonight." Liar. She was lying. But why? Aiden studied her, searching for any sign of why she'd deny it. But before he could press further, the server arrived with their drinks, breaking the tension. Olivia picked up her glass, taking a small sip of water before setting it down. "Look," she said, her voice softer. "I don't know what you're looking for, but I'm just here for dinner. Can we stick to that?" Aiden hesitated. His instincts screamed at him that she wasn't being honest. But the pleading look in her eyes stopped him from pushing further. "For now." "Sure," he said, leaning back. "Dinner it is." They moved on to safer topics: books, travel, movies. Olivia was smart, funny, easy to talk to. But no matter how much they talked, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping something from him. That night, after leaving the restaurant, Aiden sat in his car gripping the steering wheel. His mind replayed the evening over and over. Olivia's poised smile, her calm denial, and that flicker, the one moment where he was sure she recognized him too. She knew something. Aiden clenched his jaw. He wasn't one to dwell on strangers. He didn't chase answers no one was asking. But this wasn't nothing. This was personal. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked his phone and scrolled to a folder he hadn't opened in years. Accident recovery. The memories inside were raw, too close, but he needed to see them again. Aiden swiped through the photos, the wrecked car, the hospital bills, and then his heart stopped. A grainy selfie. Ivy had taken it while he was still in a wheelchair, and next to the bed, on the table, a hospital bracelet, and a note. "Stay strong, Aiden. The road ahead is hard, but you're harder to break." The handwriting was delicate, looping, and it was hers. Aiden exhaled slowly. He didn't know why Olivia was lying, but he was going to find out. A past that won't stay buried. Aiden barely slept that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Olivia's voice echoing in his head. "I don't recall ever meeting you before tonight." She was lying. He knew it. His accident had changed everything. It had left him broken, both physically and emotionally. He had spent months in a hospital bed, struggling to recover, drowning in pain, hopelessness, and the bitter truth that his old life was gone. And yet there had been one light in the darkness. A nurse. She had been the only one who had spoken to him like he was a person, not just another case to be monitored. When he had wanted to give up, she had pushed him forward, refusing to let him sink. And that note, those words had stayed with him longer than she had. "Stay strong, Aiden. The road ahead is hard, but you're harder to break." Even back then, he had never known her name. He had only caught glimpses of her between the haze of medication and exhaustion. But now that he had seen Olivia, now that he had spoken to her, it was her. It had to be. And for some reason, she didn't want him to know. By the time the sun rose, Aiden had made a decision. He needed answers. A meeting that changes everything. Aiden sat at his desk, mindlessly scrolling through emails while his thoughts remained elsewhere. He should have been focused on work, on the deals waiting for his approval, the company he had built from the ground up. But instead, his mind was stuck on Olivia. She was hiding something. And if there was one thing Aiden Mercer didn't do, it was let mysteries go unsolved. Before he could overthink it, he pulled out his phone and dialed her number. She answered after 3 rings. "Aiden." His name on her lips sent a jolt through his chest. "Hey." A pause. "Is everything okay?" He forced himself to keep his tone light. "I wanted to see you again." Another pause. She exhaled slowly. "Aiden, I don't think that's a good idea." That only made him more determined. "Just coffee. No pressure. No expectations." She hesitated. He could hear the conflict in her voice. She wanted to say no, but something was stopping her. Finally, she sighed. 1 hour. "Great. I'll send you the address." She hung up before he could say anything else. Aiden smirked to himself. She was running from something. But he was going to find out what. An unfinished chapter. The cafe was small and tucked into a quiet street away from the city's chaos. Aiden arrived first, choosing a table by the window. He watched the street, waiting. And then there she was. Olivia walked in, her expression cautious, her green eyes scanning the room before landing on him. She hesitated for just a second before making her way over. "You're persistent," she said, sitting across from him. "I prefer determined," Aiden replied smoothly. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, but it was gone just as fast. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Aiden leaned back, studying her. "I don't think you were honest with me last night." Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "About what?" He didn't hesitate. "About knowing me." Something shifted in her expression, so brief that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Aiden wasn't most people. She shook her head, keeping her voice steady. "Aiden, you were my nurse," he said, cutting her off. "After my accident, you wrote me that note." Olivia's breath hitched. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she set her coffee down with deliberate care. "You're mistaken." Aiden wasn't buying it. "I don't think I am." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Even if I was, why does it matter?" Aiden frowned. "Because you helped me." "You?" He stopped himself. He didn't know how to explain it. She had been there when he had nothing, when he had been at his absolute lowest, and now she was pretending like it had never happened. "That was years ago," Olivia said quietly. "I was just doing my job." "It was more than that," Aiden insisted. A muscle in her jaw tensed. "Aiden, I don't know what you want from me." He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, she stood. "This was a mistake," she said, grabbing her coat. Aiden stood too, blocking her path. "Olivia, wait." But she shook her head. "Let it go, Aiden. Whatever you're looking for, it's in the past." And then she walked out, leaving him staring after her. But Aiden Mercer wasn't the kind of man who just let things go. He was going to find out what Olivia was hiding, and nothing was going to stop him. A revelation that changes everything. Later that night, Aiden sat in his office, the city lights flickering outside his window. He had spent hours digging through old files, searching for any trace of Olivia. And then, finally, he found it. A patient report. His. And at the bottom, scribbled in neat handwriting, "Primary nurse, Olivia Carter." Aiden exhaled sharply, staring at the name. He had been right. She had been there. So why was she lying? Why was she pretending like none of it had happened? His chest tightened as a new thought hit him. What if it wasn't about him? What if she was hiding something else? Aiden clenched his jaw. There was only one way to find out, and he wasn't stopping until he had the truth. Unraveling the past. Aiden barely slept that night. Again, he stared at his laptop screen, the document open in front of him, the confirmation he needed. Primary nurse, Olivia Carter. She had been there. She had helped him through the worst time of his life, and she was lying about it. But why? Aiden leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His office was dark except for the glow of the city skyline outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. Usually he found comfort in this, the solitude, the quiet hum of the world moving while he stayed still. But tonight, It felt empty. He thought back to the hospital. The cold, sterile walls. The beeping machines. The feeling of being utterly powerless. And her. The quiet nurse who had sat with him when no one else had. The one who had stayed late to make sure he was comfortable. The one who had left him that note when he had felt like giving up. Stay strong, Aiden. The road ahead is hard, but you're harder to break. It had mattered. She had mattered. So why was she pretending otherwise? Aiden didn't believe in coincidences. If Olivia was lying, there had to be a reason, and he was going to find out what it was. A plan in motion. The next morning, Aiden was out of his apartment before sunrise. He needed answers, and if Olivia wasn't going to give them to him willingly, he'd have to get them another way. He found himself driving toward St. Luke's Medical Center, the very hospital where he had spent months recovering. He hadn't been back since he'd walked out of there 3 years ago, vowing never to return. But here he was. As he stepped through the glass doors, the scent of antiseptic and fresh linen hit him like a punch to the gut. The distant hum of machines, the muffled conversations of doctors and nurses. It was all too familiar. A receptionist looked up from her desk, offering a polite smile. "Good morning. Can I help you?" Aiden cleared his throat, pushing down the unease curling in his stomach. "I was a patient here a few years ago. I need to find information on a nurse who worked my case." The receptionist frowned. "We don't usually give out staff records, sir. Privacy policies." Aiden sighed, already expecting the answer. "I understand, but it's important." The woman hesitated, glancing at her computer screen. "Do you have a name?" "Olivia Carter." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Carter no longer works here." Aiden stiffened. "What do you mean?" "She left over a year ago," the receptionist said, lowering her voice slightly. It was sudden. No explanation. Aiden's mind raced. Sudden. No explanation. His gut told him there was more to this than Olivia was letting on. "Do you know where she went?" he asked. The receptionist shook her head. "No, but if you leave your information, I can." "No need," Aiden said quickly, already turning away. He had everything he needed. Olivia was running, and he was going to find out why. A confrontation. Aiden didn't bother calling Olivia. He knew she would just ignore him. Instead, he drove straight to the small clinic where she worked. The place was nothing like St. Luke's. Smaller, quieter. The kind of place people went when they wanted to avoid big hospitals. Aiden stepped inside, scanning the reception area. A few patients sat in the waiting room, flipping through magazines. And then he saw her. Olivia. She was standing near the nurse's station, flipping through a file, completely unaware of his presence. For a second, Aiden just watched her. She looked different here, more relaxed, somehow. She wore dark blue scrubs, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun. He hesitated. She had been avoiding him. She had made it clear she didn't want to talk about the past. But Aiden had never been the type to walk away from the truth. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Olivia." She stiffened, her fingers tightening around the file she was holding. Slowly, she turned to face him. "Aiden," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said simply. She glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. Then she sighed. "Not here." She led him to a small break room at the back of the clinic. The moment the door shut, she turned to him. "I told you to let this go," she said, crossing her arms. Aiden ignored her. "Why did you lie?" "Aiden." "You were my nurse," he interrupted. "I found the records. I know you were there. So why are you pretending like we've never met?" Her jaw tightened. "Because it doesn't matter." "It does to me." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Olivia let out a shaky breath. "I left St. Luke's for a reason, Aiden. A reason that has nothing to do with you." "Then tell me what it is," he pressed. She shook her head. It's personal. I don't care, Aiden said, stepping closer. You helped me when I needed it the most. Now it's my turn. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, Aiden thought she might actually tell them. But then she looked away. I can't, she whispered. Aiden exhaled, frustration curling in his chest. Olivia, please, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Just let it go. Aiden studied her, his instincts screaming that she was keeping something from him. But he also saw the fear in her eyes. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about him, and that scared him more than anything. The truth begins to unfold. Later that night, Aiden sat in his car, staring at his phone. He had a choice. He could listen to Olivia and let it go, or he could dig deeper. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He hesitated for only a moment before typing. Background check. Olivia Carter. A few minutes later, a file appeared on his screen. Aiden's heart pounded as he scrolled through it. And then, he froze. His entire body went still as his eyes locked onto a single piece of information. A name. Aiden's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Olivia. This was about him. And it changed everything. The secrets we keep. Aiden's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The name on the screen burned into his mind, sending a cold wave of realization crashing over him. Lucas Carter. His chest tightened. Carter. Olivia's last name. He quickly scrolled down the report, his pulse hammering in his ears. Lucas Carter, aged 16, diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. Aiden felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. A brother. Olivia had a younger brother with a chronic illness. That was why she had disappeared. That was why she had left St. Luke's so suddenly. She hadn't just been running from him. She had been protecting someone. Aiden leaned back in his seat, exhaling sharply. He wasn't sure why it hit him so hard. Maybe because he understood now. He understood the exhaustion in Olivia's eyes, the hesitation, the walls she had built so fiercely around herself. She had been carrying this weight alone. And suddenly, Aiden felt something he hadn't expected. Not just the need to know, the need to help, a plan to reach her. Aiden wasn't reckless. He knew confronting Olivia with this information would only push her further away. She had spent years keeping this hidden. If he came at her too hard, she'd shut him out for good. So instead of barging into her life like a storm, he took a different approach. Patience. The next morning, he sent a text. Aiden, hey, I know last night was a lot, but I meant what I said. I just want to talk. Minutes passed. No response. Hours passed. Still nothing. Aiden sighed, rubbing his temples. She was shutting him out. Again. But this time, he wasn't giving up. He waited until the evening before sending another message. Aiden, I'm not here to dig up the past, Olivia. I just want to understand. Another hour. And then, a response. Olivia, tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll meet you at Lincoln Park. Aiden let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This was it. His chance to finally get the truth. The truth comes to light. The next evening, Aiden arrived at Lincoln Park early. The city lights shimmered in the distance, the lake reflecting the soft glow of street lamps. He spotted Olivia before she saw him. She stood near a park bench, her arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't wearing scrubs this time, just a simple sweater and jeans, but there was something about her posture, the way she held herself like she was bracing for impact. She was scared. Not of him. Of what he might ask. Aiden approached carefully, stopping a few feet away. You actually showed up. She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool night air. Yeah, guess I owe you that much. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the bench. Sit with me. She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the wooden seat. Aiden sat beside her, keeping just enough space between them so she wouldn't feel cornered. Silence stretched between them, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Olivia spoke. I know you ran a background check on me. Aiden didn't bother denying it. Yeah. She let out a bitter chuckle. Figures. Another pause. Then, Lucas is my brother, she said softly. Aiden turned to her, his expression unreadable. I know. She let out a shaky breath. I wasn't trying to lie to you, Aiden. I didn't want you to look at me differently. Differently how? Like I'm fragile. Like I'm some charity case, she whispered, her fingers twisting in her lap. I've spent my entire life making sure Lucas gets what he needs. I didn't have time for relationships or dating or any of it. Aiden listened carefully, his gaze unwavering. I left St. Luke's because Lucas got worse, she continued. His medical bills were piling up. I couldn't work long shifts at a big hospital anymore, so I took a job at the clinic. Less stress, more flexibility, more time with him. Aiden's throat tightened. You've been doing this alone. She swallowed hard. For as long as I can remember. Aiden exhaled. Olivia. She shook her head. Please don't say you're sorry. I don't want pity. I just want you to understand. Aiden was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. I do understand, he said. But I'm not going to walk away from this. Her head snapped toward him. What? I'm not going anywhere. His voice was steady, certain. You've spent so long believing you have to do this alone. But you don't. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Aiden, I don't need saving. I'm not trying to save you, he said. I'm trying to be here for you. There's a difference. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes searching his. Aiden continued, his voice softer now. You were there for me when I had nothing left. You pulled me through the worst time of my life. And you did it without expecting anything in return. Olivia's eyes shimmered, but she blinked quickly, as if trying to push back the emotion rising inside her. I owe you a lot, Olivia, Aiden murmured. But more than that, I care about you, and I care about Lucas too. She inhaled sharply, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. You barely know him, she whispered. I want to, Aiden said simply. Silence. Then Olivia shook her head. It's not that easy. Lucas is my whole world, Aiden. If you get involved, it's not just about me. It's about him too. And I won't let anyone hurt him. I wouldn't, Aiden said firmly. She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was searching for any sign that he was lying. She found none. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Okay, she said softly. Aiden blinked. Okay. She met his gaze, something vulnerable in her eyes. You want to meet Lucas? Aiden's heart pounded. Yes, he said without hesitation. I do. Olivia exhaled, shaking her head slightly. God help me, but okay. Aiden felt something shift between them. For the first time, she wasn't pushing him away. For the first time, she was letting him in. And Aiden knew, without a doubt. This was just the beginning. The first step toward trust. Aiden could feel the weight of Olivia's decision settle between them. This was more than just letting him into her world. This was trust. And for someone like Olivia, trust wasn't given lightly. She sighed, running a hand through her auburn hair. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, my apartment. Aiden's eyebrows lifted slightly. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. Are you sure? She exhaled sharply. No, but if I don't give you a chance now, I never will. Aiden nodded, sensing how hard this was for her. I won't let you down, Olivia. She looked away, staring out at the darkened skyline. I hope not. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, the faint sound of the city humming in the background. Then Olivia stood. I should go. Aiden stood with her, hands in his pockets. I'll see you tomorrow. She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, tomorrow. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Aiden watched her go, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. A knock on the door. The next evening, Aiden stood outside Olivia's apartment, a bottle of juice in one hand and a bag of takeout in the other. His fingers hovered over the doorbell. For some reason, this moment made him more nervous than multi-million-dollar business deals or high-stakes negotiations. He wasn't meeting a client. He wasn't closing a deal. He was meeting her family. Aiden took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door swung open. Olivia stood there, dressed in a loose sweater and jeans, her expression unreadable. "You brought food." Aiden smirked. "I figured if Lucas doesn't like me, at least I can bribe him with dinner." She huffed a small laugh and stepped aside. "Come in." Aiden stepped inside, taking in the small but cozy apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, personal. Family photos lined the walls, books stacked on nearly every surface, and in the corner, a pile of medical supplies sat neatly arranged. And then he saw him. A boy, maybe 16, sat on the couch with a blanket draped over his lap. His frame was thin, too thin, but his eyes were bright and sharp. He was studying Aiden with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "So, you're the guy," Lucas said, his voice slightly raspy. Aiden raised an eyebrow. "The guy." Lucas smirked. "The guy my sister won't shut up about." Olivia groaned from behind him. "Oh my God." "Lucas." Aiden chuckled, setting the food down on the coffee table. "Well, I hope she said good things." Lucas shrugged. "Mostly that you're stubborn." "Accurate," Aiden said, sitting down across from him. "But I prefer the term persistent." Lucas laughed, a short, breathy sound, but it was real. Aiden noticed Olivia watching them carefully, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. So he took his time. They ate, talking about nothing too serious. Movies, music, random stories from work. Lucas was sharp, sarcastic, funny. He had a quick wit and a mischievous glint in his eyes that reminded Aiden of himself at that age. For the first time in a while, Aiden felt at ease. And then, Lucas coughed. Not just a small cough. A deep, rough, rattling cough. Olivia was by his side in an instant, rubbing his back, guiding him through breathing techniques. Aiden just sat there, frozen. He had read about cystic fibrosis. He had seen the medical records. But knowing something and witnessing it were two different things. It took almost a full minute before Lucas's breathing evened out. Olivia helped him lean back, checking his oxygen levels on a small monitor. Lucas, despite looking exhausted, gave Aiden a weak grin. "So still want to stick around?" Aiden didn't hesitate. "Yes." Lucas raised an eyebrow, even after seeing that. Aiden nodded, especially after seeing that. Lucas studied him for a moment, then looked at Olivia. "I like him." Olivia rolled her eyes. Yeah. Aiden didn't miss the way her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. Like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe he wasn't going anywhere. Late-night conversations. After Lucas had gone to bed, Aiden and Olivia sat together in the small kitchen. She was sipping tea, her expression tired but softer than before. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said quietly. Aiden tilted his head. "Do what?" "This." She gestured between them. "Lucas. Me. It's a lot." Aiden leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "I know. And I'm still here." Olivia swallowed hard, looking down at her cup. She was scared. Not of him. Of what this meant. Of letting herself believe that someone might actually stay. Aiden reached out, gently covering her hand with his. "You don't have to do this alone, Olivia." His voice was low, steady. "Not anymore." She didn't pull away. She just sat there, fingers curled around his, and for the first time since this all started, she let him in. And Aiden knew. This wasn't just about fixing the past. This was about building something new. together, breaking down walls. Aiden woke up the next morning feeling different, lighter. He hadn't even realized how much weight had been pressing on his shoulders until last night, until Olivia finally let him in. It wasn't much, a moment, a quiet acceptance, but it was something. He wasn't just the billionaire tech CEO anymore. He wasn't just a name Olivia had once scribbled on a hospital chart. He was someone who cared. And now he was someone she trusted, even if she was still hesitant to admit it. As he stepped out of his apartment, he made a decision. He wasn't waiting for Olivia to tell him what she needed. He was going to show her, an unexpected visitor. Olivia was exhausted. She had spent the night checking on Lucas, making sure his oxygen level stayed stable, ensuring he had everything he needed before she finally collapsed into bed. She barely had time to drink her morning coffee when the doorbell rang. Frowning, she set her mug down and walked over to the door, half expecting it to be a delivery. But when she opened it, she froze. Aiden stood there, a confident smirk on his face, holding 2 coffee cups and a bag of groceries. Olivia blinked. "What are you doing?" "Feeding you," Aiden said simply, stepping past her like he belonged there. "You clearly don't have time to take care of yourself properly, so I figured I'd help." Olivia turned, crossing her arms as he made his way to the kitchen, unloading eggs, fruit, and fresh bread onto the counter. "Aiden, I know," he said, not even looking at her as he pulled the frying pan from her cabinet. "You don't need help. You've been doing this on your own forever. But newsflash, Olivia, everyone needs help sometimes." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Did you just show up at my house and decide to cook me breakfast?" He grinned. "Technically, I showed up and decided to cook you and Lucas breakfast. Where is he?" "Sleeping," Olivia muttered, watching as Aiden cracked an egg into the pan, "which is exactly where I should be." Aiden shot her a look. "Then go. I got this." Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever just stepped in like this before. She was always the one who handled everything. The one who made sure Lucas had what he needed. The one who never asked for anything in return. Now, Aiden was here. And he wasn't asking permission. He was doing it anyway. The man who stays. By the time Lucas woke up, the smell of fresh coffee, eggs, and toast had filled the apartment. He shuffled out of his bedroom, rubbing his tired eyes. "Is that bacon?" Aiden grinned from where he stood at the stove. "You bet." Lucas looked between him and Olivia, his gaze sharp despite his grogginess. "Okay, what is happening?" Aiden broke into our kitchen. Olivia deadpanned, taking a sip of the coffee he had brought her. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Cool. I like him more already." Aiden laughed, sliding a plate toward him. "Eat up, kid. You need energy." Lucas didn't argue. He sat down, digging into his food with the kind of hunger that made Olivia's heart ache. It was always like this after a rough night. He was weak, exhausted, and yet, somehow, Aiden had stepped in like he had always been there. Like he belonged. A conversation that changes everything. Later that afternoon, Lucas was settled on the couch watching a movie, and Olivia found herself sitting on the balcony with Aiden, the cool spring air swirling around them. She hugged her sweater around herself. "Why are you doing this?" Aiden leaned against the railing, his eyes serious. "Because I want to." She shook her head. "That's not a real answer." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Olivia, I spent years burying myself in work, convincing myself that if I just made enough money, built my company big enough, I wouldn't feel so empty." She stayed quiet, listening. "But it didn't work," he admitted. "Success, wealth, none of it mattered when I had no one to share it with." Olivia's throat tightened. "I was in that hospital for months," Aiden continued, his voice quieter now. "And I was surrounded by people who didn't actually care. Doctors, nurses. They were professional, polite, but distant. She knew that. She had seen it firsthand. But then, Aidan looked at her. But then there was you. Olivia's breath caught. You cared, he said simply. You stayed. She swallowed. Aidan, I don't think you realize how much you changed my life, he said, his voice steady. And now, I want to be here for you. For Lucas, because you deserve that. Because I care. She didn't know how to respond. Because no one had ever said that to her before. She had spent so long being the strong one, the caretaker, the one who never needed anyone. And now, this man, this billionaire, this tech genius, this former patient was telling her that he saw her, that she mattered. And suddenly, Olivia realized. She had been so scared of losing control that she never let anyone help her carry the weight. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The beginning of something more. The days passed in a blur. Aidan became a regular presence in Olivia and Lucas's lives. He didn't push, didn't demand anything. He just showed up. He made dinner when Olivia was too tired. He played video games with Lucas when his energy was low. He sat with Olivia on the balcony after long shifts, just listening, just being there. And slowly, Olivia felt her walls crumbling. One evening, as they stood in the kitchen, Aidan handed her a glass of wine. Ivy's throwing a charity gala this weekend, he said casually. I need a date. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me to go? Aidan smirked. Would you say yes if I did? She rolled her eyes. I don't exactly fit in with the billionaire crowd. Aidan leaned closer. Then I guess they're the ones missing out. Her heart skipped a beat. This was dangerous. She was letting him in, letting herself feel something. And yet, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. She looked up at him, her lips curving into a small smile. Fine. One night. Aidan grinned. I'll take it. And just like that, everything changed. The future worth fighting for. Olivia had never been to a billionaire's gala before. To be honest, she had never even imagined being at one. Yet here she was, dressed in a sleek black evening gown, hair curled and swept into a loose updo. She barely recognized herself as she stepped into the grand ballroom beside Aidan. He looked at her like she had hung the stars. You clean up nicely, Carter, he murmured, leaning in. She smirked. So do you, Mercer. The gala was extravagant. The ceiling sparkled with chandeliers, and soft jazz played as well-dressed guests sipped champagne. Olivia felt out of place. She had spent her life in scrubs, her days filled with emergency calls, hospital shifts, and medical charts. Now she was surrounded by people who had never worried about a medical bill in their lives. Aidan must have noticed the tension in her shoulders because he squeezed her hand. Relax, he murmured. They're just people. Rich people, she whispered back. He grinned. You say that like it's a bad thing. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. Then, a voice rang out. Aidan. A tall woman with sleek blonde hair approached, dressed in an emerald green gown that screamed old money. Olivia recognized her immediately. Lena Whitmore, one of Aidan's biggest investors. She was also gorgeous, powerful, and exactly the type of woman who belonged here. Olivia suddenly felt incredibly small. Lena's sharp eyes flicked toward her, assessing in an instant. And who is this? Aidan's grip on Olivia's hand heightened. This is Olivia Carter, my date. Something flickered in Lena's expression. Surprise. Interest. Then, amusement. Oh, you're the nurse, she said smoothly. Olivia stiffened. The way she said it, like she was a curiosity, like she didn't belong, made her want to run. But before she could respond, Aidan did. She's also the smartest, strongest woman I know, he said easily, his voice carrying just the right edge of warning. And she's with me. Lena's smirk barely faltered. Of course. Olivia let out a slow breath as Lena walked away. She turned to Aidan. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. His blue eyes locked onto hers. "You belong here, Olivia. Whether you believe it or not." Something warm unfurled in her chest. She wasn't sure she'd ever believe that. But when Aiden looked at her like that, like she was more than enough, she almost did. The moment everything changed. Hours later, after the gala had ended, Aiden drove Olivia home. The night air was crisp, the city quiet. Lucas had texted earlier, telling her not to worry. He was fine, watching movies, and yes, he took his meds. But Olivia's thoughts weren't on Lucas right now. They were on Aiden, on the way he had stood up for her, on the way he had looked at her like she mattered. As they reached her apartment, she hesitated at the door. For the first time, in a long, long time, she didn't want to say goodnight. Aiden must have sensed it, because he leaned against the doorway, watching her with that look. The one that made her heart race. "Tonight was nice," she said softly. He smirked. "Just nice." She rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. Okay, it was better than nice. Silence stretched between them. Then, Aiden reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught. "Olivia," he murmured. She swallowed. "Yeah?" He hesitated, searching her face. Then, "I love you." Her world stopped. Her heart stumbled. Aiden Mercer, billionaire, CEO, the man who had every reason to walk away. Loved her. Not just liked. Not just cared. Loved. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "Aiden, you don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "Not yet. Not until you're ready." Her chest ached. Because she was ready. She had just been too scared to admit it. But she wasn't scared anymore. So she took a breath and whispered, "I love you too." Aiden's eyes darkened. And then he kissed her, slow, deep, real, and for the first time in forever. Olivia let herself believe in a future she never thought she'd have. 1 year later, the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air as families gathered at the school fair. Lucas stood proudly at his science booth, explaining his latest project to a group of fascinated parents. He looked stronger now, healthier, happier. Olivia smiled as she watched him. Then, a warm arm wrapped around her waist. She leaned into Aiden, who kissed the side of her head. "You proud?" "More than I can say," she murmured. Lucas caught sight of them and smirked. "Ah, are you two being gross again?" Aiden laughed. "Absolutely." Lucas rolled his eyes, but his grin gave him away. Olivia turned to Aiden. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying," she whispered. "For keeping your promises. For being exactly who I needed, even when I didn't know I needed you." Aiden pressed a kiss to her temple. "You don't have to thank me, Olivia." He smiled. "We're in this together." Olivia squeezed his hand, her heart full. Together. For now. For always. And for the first time in her life. She believed it. A life rewritten. The spring air was crisp, and the fairgrounds bustled with the laughter of children and the chatter of parents. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over everything, Olivia watched Lucas proudly present his science project. His face was animated, his voice passionate, explaining his invention to a captivated crowd of students and parents. Lucas had always been resourceful, but now he was truly thriving. The portable air filtration system he had designed was a reflection of his resilience, of his strength despite everything life had thrown at him. It was a project born out of his own struggles with cystic fibrosis, and watching him share it with the world made Olivia's heart swell with pride. Next to her, Aiden squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, not just with each other, but with Lucas too. "I'm proud of him," she said softly, her eyes never leaving Lucas. Aiden smiled down at her, his voice just as soft. "You should be. He's come a long way." Olivia let out a breath, her heart full. "We all have," she murmured. A year ago, She had never imagined she'd be standing here, at a school fair, watching her brother not just survive, but live. She had spent so many years putting her own needs aside, terrified of letting someone else in, convinced that if she did, she'd be betraying the one person who needed her the most. But Aiden had changed that. He had come into their lives quietly, with patience and kindness, never forcing her to share more than she was ready for. And bit by bit, he had become more than just a presence in their world. He had become an integral part of it. He was here, with her, with them. As the evening wore on, the fair began to wind down. The glow of the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and purple, and the first stars began to twinkle above. Aiden and Olivia walked through the fairgrounds hand in hand, Lucas trailing behind, laughing as he ran off to join his friends. They made their way to a bench by the lake, the soft hum of the fair's distant sounds blending with the quiet rustling of the wind. Olivia sat down, leaning back, closing her eyes for a moment. "You know," Aiden said, sitting next to her, "I can't believe how far we've come." Olivia opened her eyes, turning to him. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "Yeah." He smiled, his eyes full of affection. "When I first met you, I didn't know what to expect. But I'm so glad I didn't walk away." Olivia reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "I'm glad too," she said softly, her voice steady with the weight of her emotions. "I never thought I could rely on anyone. Not really. But you've shown me what it's like to trust again." "I don't want to be the hero in your story," Aiden said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "I just want to be the guy who stays." And for the first time, Olivia realized the truth in his words. She didn't need a hero. What she needed was someone who saw her, who cared for her in a way that wasn't about fixing or saving. It was about living together. "And you are," she whispered. "You're my person, Aiden." Aiden smiled, his eyes lighting up with the kind of joy she hadn't seen in a long time. "And you're mine." The moment of forever. Aiden and Olivia sat in peaceful silence, watching as the last of the fairgoers packed up and the lights of the carnival slowly dimmed. The sky above them was a deep velvety blue now, the stars bright against the darkening expanse. Olivia leaned her head on Aiden's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. She had spent so long running from the idea of being loved, of being supported, but now she couldn't imagine a life without it. Aiden was here, and he wasn't going anywhere. Not anymore. "You know," she said, her voice soft and contemplative, "I used to think that love was just a fleeting thing, that it wasn't something that could last. But with you, I think I might finally understand what it really means." Aiden turned his head to kiss her forehead gently. "What does it mean?" "It means choosing each other every day. It means trusting when everything feels uncertain. And it means knowing that even when things are hard, we can still make it through together." Aiden's voice was barely a whisper as he spoke, but the depth of his words filled her chest. "I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. We're in this together, always." She smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Always," she echoed. In that moment, with Aiden by her side and Lucas not far behind, Olivia knew the truth of what it meant to have a family. Not just one that was bound by blood, but one that was built on choice, on commitment, and on the quiet strength of people who weren't afraid to love and be loved in return. As the night grew colder, Aiden wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Together, they watched the stars above and felt the warmth of their new life unfolding in front of them. Olivia wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't need to know, because she wasn't facing it alone. They had each other, and that was enough.